Hey all, this is Reddit Tosker. At the time of recording, Dragon's Dogma 2 has a mostly negative review score on Steam. The two main issues people are upset about are the microtransactions and the performance on release. And people in my comment section have been asking me why I didn't mention either of those things in my review. So in this video I'd like to answer those questions and also give my thoughts on the situation as a whole. First, for the performance issue. I didn't mention any performance issues because I didn't experience any. Or at least I didn't experience any that were serious enough for me to notice. My reviews focus on the things that I care about and the things I have some expertise in. And I'm afraid performance isn't one of those things. I can tell the difference between 30 frames per second and 60, but I've never actually seen more than 60 frames per second. In fact, I've never seen more than 1080p resolution. So I hesitate to talk about performance issues in video games simply because I don't notice them very often. And that may be what happened here. Throughout the entire time that I played, I didn't notice anything severe enough to mention. I played in 1080p at 60 frames per second and I didn't notice much of any frame dips. It could be that I got lucky, or it could be that I'm not very sensitive to things like that given that I played most of my life on console. Either way, I think it's probably best to look to other reviewers for performance information, because it's not something I'm going to be able to talk about with authority in the future or now. Now, as for the microtransactions, there's a rumor going around that reviewers weren't able to talk about the microtransactions until after release, or that they were secret and people just didn't know about them. That isn't true. Capcom was not exactly hiding them. In the media kit that I got and that everybody else got, they reveal a list of all the microtransactions and how much they cost. So I did know about it, technically. I didn't mention it in my review because I didn't have access to those items in my review. They just gave me a list of what you could buy. And I skimmed it for 5 seconds, saw what was on the list, and thought to myself, well, all that stuff is stupid, I'm not buying that, and then put it out of my mind. When I saw this list, I had already been playing the game for a while, so I had all of the items that were on the microtransactions. And I had a sense of how easy it was or difficult it was to get them. You can buy the jail keys in the game for relatively cheap, and you can get a permanent one fairly early. There are like 5 port crystals you can get throughout a playthrough. You find wake stones and wake stone shards all the time. And I never felt like I was hurting for rift stone crystals, even though during this review period the only other people I could play with were other reviewers. So even though there was a very limited pool of people that could access my pawn, I felt like I always had plenty, and the stuff you could buy with it wasn't that important. The only really good stuff was the 2 items that let you change your appearance. These purchases looked stupid to me. The items you can buy from it are close to worthless, and so I just kind of forgot about them. I skimmed the list for 5 seconds, and then I went back to playing Dragon's Dogma for another 40 hours. And I didn't feel the need to include in my review these worthless DLC items that I didn't have access to and that I wasn't going to buy. So those are the reasons I didn't talk about it. But now that we are on the subject, let's talk about it now. I don't like microtransactions. I don't like them in general, but I especially don't like them in a single-player game that's fully priced. $70. Now, I maintain that these particular microtransaction items are worthless. You don't need them. Your experience won't be better or that much easier with them. The only kind of valuable one is the port crystal, but like I said, you'll get like 5 or 6 of those in a playthrough. So its value will be limited and it will be most valuable in the first few hours. But that's beside the point. Microtransactions are bad inherently, because if you pay someone to do something, you incentivize them to do it more. So if microtransactions are a substantial amount of a game's revenue, or a substantial amount of a projected game's revenue, then the developers will be pushed, sometimes against their will, to design the game in such a way that you want those microtransactions. And even in situations where the developers aren't forced to do that, the player base will always wonder if that's why things are the way they are. It's hard for someone like Itsuna, the director of Dragon's Dogma 2, to talk about how good it is to walk places. You know, you don't need fast travel, just don't make your game's world boring. It's hard for him to talk about that vision in a convincing way when they're selling a port crystal for $3. It makes people not believe him. Let me ask this. Why can't I delete my character? Why do I have to go into the save files to delete it that way? Why is there no option to start over? Is it perhaps because they're selling the Art of Metamorphosis in the store? Is it so that you have to pay cash to edit your character's appearance? And there are Art of Metamorphosis for sale in-game. You can use Rift Crystals to buy them. But they also sell Rift Crystals. And that makes people suspicious. It's hard to believe that there was some kind of design constraint for letting people delete their files and start over. This is something that every game has always had, including Dragon's Dogma 1. So when you notice that you can't start over, and you wonder why, it's hard not to assume that it's because Capcom is being greedy bastards and are trying to shake a couple extra bucks off of you after you've given them 70. It's hard to not assume that this is one of those situations I was describing where their desire to sell microtransactions negatively influenced the design of the game. And then the situation gets worse when you see the problems on release. I may not have experienced very many problems, but maybe my PC is better than most people's. Capcom themselves have admitted that there's critical problems with crashing and freezing. I've heard of people not being able to download it. Not to mention all of the problems with the frame rate. So you have a game that launches poorly on release, that you charge $70 for, and then it has the gall to have $40 worth of microtransactions available for purchase. No. See, what makes me upset is that I like Dragon's Dogma. I like Dragon's Dogma 2. I waited a long time for Dragon's Dogma 2 to come out. I proselytized the virtues of the original game for years. And now this release of what is a good game underneath all of this mess has been tainted by Capcom's greed and incompetence. I think people are right to be upset. Games shouldn't release in this state, and they shouldn't be filled with shameless microtransactions. I'm glad that Dragon's Dogma 2 is getting a bunch of negative reviews on Steam, and I hope that that draws people away from purchasing the game, or convinces them to refund it. If for no other reason than to hopefully teach Capcom a lesson when it's looking at its financials, and disincentivize from doing something like this again. You can always buy the game later when it's in a more acceptable state or at a discount. But as it stands, I would recommend that if you're bothered by the performance issues or offended by the microtransactions, don't buy it. Refund the game. It's currently as bad as it's going to be. It can only get better. Capcom has already issued this statement, promising to try and fix the performance, try and fix the frame rate, and they even said that they're going to try and get you to be able to start a new character on the Steam version. And I think that's good. People should keep complaining. Who knows if they would have prioritized being able to start over if people hadn't been complaining online. Anyway, that's the end of this video. As always, thank you very much for watching.